Hello and welcome back to the Banter Blitz final between Magnus, Carlsen and So Wesley. In this video I'm going to cover game 8. Right now Carlsen is leading to 4-3 and Carlsen needs only 1.5 points to clinch the victory. And actually also I mentioned before that Carlsen played very interesting chess throughout the whole series. Also partly because he was somewhat tipsy, so he always went for the very interesting and quite risky continuations, and this game was no different at all. So let's dive into it. Starts with c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, e3, knight c6. You're actually going to have sort of a reverse Sicilian here. So a3 and d5, and it actually feels like that white is sort of playing this diamond variation with which would be the black pieces, but he also has a tempi up. So comes queen c2, bishop e6, knight f3, bishop d6, exchange, bishop c4, takes, and castle. And again, here comes that Carlsen was not interested in the boring continuation, so he actually had no plan to castle. So he played the move d3, queen e7, bishop d2, a5, bishop c3, and after a4, Carlsen decided, well, I'm not going to castle in this game at all, so let's make the move that nowadays everybody plays, just h4. Yeah, of course the idea is just push this pawn down and try to create some play against the black king. Comes rook fe8, strongly hinting towards the idea of playing queen e6 next. Comes h5, queen e6, and here actually Carlsen played the move rook h4, but he had quite a nice idea instead of rook h4. The point is that once you push this pawn to h5, you're also planning to support it with g4, which has actually, apart from trying to launch this attack against the black king, also has a nice role to protect the f5 square, so that once you land your knight on e4, there will be no pawn f5 challenging your knight. So following this, the knight's continuation could have been to take on e6, take back, play the move knight g5, and then the rook retreats. You play g4, taking away this f square, and then you play knight e4. And white is doing very nice positionally. But this is not what Carlsen did. Of course, it's a blitz game, so you cannot blame people not making the very best moves all the time. So to queen e6, he played the move rook h4, with the idea that he can take back with the rook now. Now comes knight d8, g4, f6, and actually, so now you cannot really plan to play this idea of putting your knight on e4, because your rook is kind of stuck on b5, and if you even take away the e4 square, at some point b5 comes and your rook is going to be trapped. So Carlsen continues pushing on the king side with g5, and after b5 he puts his rook back to g4. And comes f5, rook g1. And black plays the move c5. So we can see that black is very largely expanded actually in the whole on the whole board. So e5, f5, c5, b5, a4, huge space advantage. All what Carlsen has here is his pawns on the 5th rank, and he tries to create some counterplay against the black king. So here comes g6, and after h6, knight h4, rook f8, and while Carlsen decides to sacrifice a pawn, he plays the move e4. Takes, and here you can actually stop the video to figure out how to continue with black. So white's plan is clearly to put his knight on f5, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe trying to invade with the rook at some point, rook d1, rook d7, maybe playing f4 at some point, opening up this diagonal. So white has some sort of attacking potential, but black could have actually just take the pawn and see what happens. So rook f4 is a double attack, taking this knight and threatening the pawn as well. And after knight f5, you can take the pawn with a check. When the king moves away, you can put your bishop back. And ask the world champion, what do you have for your pawn? And it's not entirely clear. But still, the white pieces are actually quite nice, so there is some counterplay. But this is not what Wesley chose. he chose not to take the pawn and just played knight e6. But after knight e6, knight f5, bishop c7, it's quite clear that he didn't get even a pawn for this this potential attack that white could have. So comes again a kind of a strange move. At move 27, finally the world champion castles, so long castle. Comes knight d4, with the idea of hinting towards knight e2. And here comes in play that Carlsen is leading by 1 point. Actually, he is not supposed to take that much risk and just try to cruise towards victory. But Carlsen was in the mood of just playing the most interesting moves in every position. So he played the move f4, seemingly sacrificing the whole board. The idea is that, yeah, of course, he wants to challenge this d4 knight. So if you take here, then he can finally take on d4. Probably bishop takes d4. But a bigger sacrifice, not just the pawn, but after f4, what Wesley did, you can just go for the exchange. So knight e2, king c2, knight g1. And here, of course, white's idea is not to take back on g1, because if you take back, they take the pawn, and you can easily be in just down material. So the point is, of course, to play rook d7 and threatening to play rook g7. So again, you have to do something, because if you just pass, say, knight e2, then you are getting mated in 3 moves. So check, 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 and checkmate. So you have to defend against this one. Your only way is actually just to sacrifice your rook now. So rook takes f5, e takes f5. So here it makes sense to just stop for a while and see what happened. So at the moment, black is up a piece, but white has all these pawns. White has all these pawns here, also threatening to take on e5. These pieces are super very active, and this rook on d7, the bishop on c3 is about to be opened. This knight is away from the action, so there is clearly a lot of counterplay. So here actually Wesley has 2 choices. He could try to save his bishop, play bishop d8, and see what happens when the white avalanche of pawns going, or play the move knight e2, trying to consolidate, take some pieces, and then see what happens in the rook ending. So let's first calculate what happens after bishop d8. So here the point is to take with the pawn, because if you take with the bishop, then black can just oppose, and it seems to be very alright for black. So the plan is to take here with the pawn. Now comes knight e2, threatening this bishop, and here it's a very important key move again to play f6. And the idea is that if you take, and play knight c3, then we are not taking back on c3 immediately, because then you just take our pawn. But play, so knight c3, you give a rook g7 jack. So now you can play rook king f8 and rook f7. And actually, if you go back, then the game likely ends in repetition, because rook g7 you cannot go to the corner, because then rook h7, f7, king f8, rook h8, and the pawn is queening. So after king f8, so after rook g7 check, you have to go to f8 always, rook f7, and here you can try the move king e8 with black, if you want to avoid the repetition. And then comes rook g7 again. The idea is simply f7, rook g8, and then make a queen out of your f pawn. And if you play bishop f6, which is the best way to continue with black, then rook g8, king e7, and rook a8 takes the rook. And while still the complications are very much ongoing, white has this very strong pass pawn on g6, black has the 2 minor pieces against the rook, and who knows what's going to happen. So it's still very complicated. Every option is possible. So that would have been if you played the move bishop d8. But something didn't like something that much in this bishop d8 line, so he played the move knight e2, trying to sort of bail out and eliminate the pieces. So now Carlsen, of course, take the piece, knight c3, and here comes again a very key move that is going to be actually decisive for the ending of the game. So you have 2 options to take. You can take with the pawn, or you can take with the king. And it's quite clear that black's counterplay is going to be that he's going to take on f4 and then try to push his pawn down the board. So let's see what happens if you take with the king first. This is how the game went. Now Wesley can take on f4. This is how it goes. Rook takes c5, and this pawn is just going forward. And your problem with white is that you cannot stop the pawn with your king, because then we just cut you off, and then again you need your rook to stop the pawn. So for that reason, in this position you have to play the move f6, g takes x6, and rook f5 is going to be the move you can stop the pawn with. And then if we stop here for a moment, it's going to be actually quite clear that white does not have real winning chances in this position. At this point he's even down a pawn. He's obviously going to take a few back, but while you are taking pawns, black is going to activate himself and is going to end up in a draw. So we will come back to this position because this is actually the game position. But now we go back to this point. So I just showed you what happens if you take with the king. And now the point is that if you take with the pawn, which is a lot stronger, the idea is that after e takes f4, rook c5, when you push your pawn, white can take on b5, and now that the pawn is not on b2 anymore but on c3, you can put your rook back and stop the pawn. And here we can see that actually white is already up a pawn. This pawn is going to be also a prey of the white pieces, and this is going to be enough to win the game. So here in this position, so knight takes c3, the winning move was b takes c3, but Carlsen played king takes c3. And after king takes, e takes f4, rook c5, f3, f6, this is what I showed you before. f6 is the only way you can stop the opponent pawn to queen. Comes g takes f, and Carlsen actually played first the move rook takes b5, taking a pawn, because he was not yet in a hurry to eat up the f pawns. But after rook c8, king d3, rook e8, rook f5, now comes the move rook e5, and it's quite clear that black managed to activate his pieces. Rook takes f3, rook takes h5, rook f6, and it's going to be enough for black to make a draw. He made the move rook b5, and black is going to play king g7. This pawn cannot be defended in the long run. There is enough counterplay in his h pawn. So here Carlsen played the move king c3, and after rook c5, king d3, the players repeated 3 times, so the game ended in a draw. So there is not a real chance to push forward in this position. So if you play like rook e6, black can take, white takes, king g7, and black's counterplays in the h pawn, taking the g6 pawn. And well, this is not a true race because it's clear it's going to be a draw. Black is going to sacrifice his rook for the a pawn, and white is going to sacrifice his rook for the h pawn, and there will be nothing left. But instead of this, the players actually agreed to a draw earlier. Yeah, this was in my opinion, the most interesting game of this battle. And obviously, the very interesting move was this f4 when Carlsen decided to, even though he's up in the match, just sacrifice everything and try to checkmate So Wesley. So even though it didn't work out, it ended up only in a draw. Carlsen, as you may know, went on winning the tournament anyway. They made one more draw, and then Carlsen managed to win the last game, clinching the tournament victory.